My unrelated sister climbed into my bed. What I thought was the fulfillment of a long-held desire turned out to be the beginning of a nightmare. On the evening of the New Year's Day, I went to bed early because I was in a bad mood. Since it was at home, I didn't lock my door. In a dazed state, I suddenly felt someone beside me, and a mix of a delicate fragrance and the smell of alcohol filled my nose. Instinctively, I reached out and touched, only to feel something soft and warm. I quickly sat up and urgently turned on my phone screen. By the dim light of the screen, I saw that the person lying next to me was actually my sister, Dana. I looked at the time. It was 1 a. Didn't Dana go to a class reunion? Why was she drunk and had she mistakenly entered the wrong room? Dana, wake up. You've entered the wrong room, I whispered, afraid of waking up my father and stepmother. I didn't. Brother, I like you. Dana's murmur was like a thunderclap, causing my whole body to tremble. The light from the phone screen went out, and I sat on the bed in a daze. My mind in turmoil. Dana is the daughter of my stepmother, and we have no blood relation. When I first met her at 20 years old, I was deeply attracted to her at 15. Back then, she was as beautiful as a porcelain doll. We are siblings. I am 28 years old, and Dinah is also 23 years old. If it weren't for her saying, "Brother, I like you," I might have kept that feeling hidden forever. But now, my heart is confused. In the pitch-black darkness, I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The room was filled only with Dana's soft breathing. It took me several minutes to finally calm down. An incredibly difficult struggle. Dana, you're drunk. Sleep here. I'll go to the living room, I said softly, preparing to get up and leave. Brother, don't. In the darkness, Dana grabbed my hand, her small hand warm and soft. I felt as if my heart was about to jump out of my chest. Brother, I know you've liked me too. Always have. Dana's voice was gentle, like a murmur. Brother, I'm not drunk. I really like you. Dana's confession instantly pierced through the emotional defense I had worked so hard to build. Dana, I like you too. Every word seemed to burst forth from my chest. With a gentle pull from Dana's hand, I tightly embraced her, holding her soft warmth in my arms. I felt as if I were in a dream, with an overwhelming sense of unreality. Brother, can you help me take off my clothes? Dana leaned in close to my ear. Her warm breath, tinged with the smell of alcohol, gently caressed my ear, and my heart began to race again. I let go of Dana, my trembling hands reaching for her tank top, even though it was winter. Dana, who always cared about her appearance, was still wearing a short-sleeved shirt and a mini skirt underneath her down jacket, which had already been thrown on the ground. I'm cold. Let's take off the skirt first. Dana held my hand. Okay. I held my breath, my hands moving towards Dana's skirt, slowly pulling the hem down. When the skirt was pulled down to Dana's knee bend, an unexpected incident suddenly occurred. The door was flung open, followed by a click as the lights were switched on. What are you doing? My stepmother's scream was piercing, and my vision was also plunged into darkness by the sudden brightness of the light. This is bad. My heart sank. What did you do? You broke. At that moment, my father's angry voice also rang out. Dad, Ella, let me explain. I rubbed my eyes hard and finally managed to see my father and stepmother standing in the doorway. What more do you want to say? I didn't believe in Tella when she said Dana went into the wrong room. But it turns out you brute actually did something so shameless and despicable. My father's eyes were red with anger, his whole body trembling. Or my stepmother, Ella? Her gaze was completely fixed on Dana, her face filled with sorrow and helplessness. I didn't do anything. I tried to defend myself. You call that didn't do anything? What else do you want to do? How did I raise such a brute? My father was emotional, completely out of control. I looked at the scene with a dazed expression, my heart cooling. Dana was lying on my bed, her face flushed, her eyes tightly shut. Her tank top was rolled up halfway, exposing her flat and smooth stomach, and her skirt was hanging at her knee bend. And I, Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, "You never used to watch these kind of emotional videos." Was disheveled, still holding the hem of Dana's skirt in my hand. This scene, no matter how you look at it, made it seem like I was taking advantage of Dana while she was drunk. This is what happened. Dana got drunk and went into the wrong room, and I was about to go sleep somewhere else when she asked me to help her take off her clothes. Although my explanation was a bit weak, I believed that with Dana's cooperation, we should be able to get through this. "Dana, help me prove it. Don't let my dad and Intala misunderstand," I shouted to remind Dana. Please note that the translation is done to the best of the translator's ability to convey the meaning and tone of the original text. However, Dana remained completely still, not even fluttering an eyelash, as if she were truly drunk. "You bro, at this point you're still lying and evading. If I don't beat you to death today, I'm not your father." My father turned around and walked away, and I silently thought, this is bad. I know my father's temper all too well. When he's angry, he really can resort to lethal blows. I couldn't afford to waste any more time, so I quickly grabbed my clothes and started putting them on. I had just managed to put on my shoes when my father came back, holding a rolling pin in his hand. Without saying a word, he swung the rolling pin at my head, but I dodged to the side. "Dad, it's really not what you think," I continued to try to explain. "You're still lying, aren't you?" Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, "You never used to watch these kind of emotional videos. Eddie, I'm going to settle the score with you." My father stopped, breathing heavily. "You borrowed your sister's living expenses of 10,000 yuan for what?" "I didn't borrow my sister's money. She gave me the money to help her invest in stock. Not that I borrowed it." I spoke the truth. 2 months ago, Dana did indeed transfer 10,000 yuan to me, insisting that I help her invest in stock. "You're lying. Who doesn't know that you lost everything in the stock market, and that your sister would be so foolish as to let you invest for her?" I found myself at a loss for words. "On the third day after you got the money, you went to that bathish and spent over 3,000. My father waved a rolling pin in his hand, his emotions running high. "What kind of bath requires spending over 3,000 yuan? Don't think I don't know what you did. Use the living expenses you borrowed from your sister to whore around. Are you even human?" I was completely stunned. What my father had just said was true. I did go to the bathish, but it was just to establish connections with a client. Moreover, I didn't use Dana's money. But what I couldn't understand was how my father knew I went to a bathish in the provincial capital, and even knew how much I spent. "I'll beat you to death." "Yeah bro, I don't have a son like you." As I was lost in thought, my father's rolling pin struck my back with full force. I stumbled and felt an intense pain in my back. Seeing my father raise the rolling pin again, I didn't have time to say anything else and quickly ducked, making a dash for the door. When I flung open the door and ran out, my father's roar followed behind me. "You're out of here. From this moment on. I don't have a son like you." I didn't dare to stop, running far away without a pause. It wasn't until I gradually calmed down that I realized I had left in such a hurry that I didn't even take my bag and phone with me, and I didn't have a single penny on me. On the early morning of the second day of the Chinese New Year, I was thus driven out of my home by my own father with a rolling pin, walking on the street of the town, which was as silent as a ghost town. I began to recall everything that had happened today. Why wouldn't Dana help me cover up the lie? How did my dad know Dana had transferred 10 yuan to me? I remember Dana saying that it was her personal saving. And how did my dad know I went to the bathish? He even knew exactly how much money I spent. These questions lingered in my mind, and I couldn't figure them out for the life of me. I wandered aimlessly through the streets of my hometown, and eventually, I found myself back at a small park near my house. Finding a random spot to sit down, I played until dawn and for my father to calm down before going back home. And while I was waiting for the day to break, killing time, I suddenly saw a familiar figure slowly walking towards me from a distance. It was Dana. She seemed to be carrying my backpack. As she got closer, even though she was wearing a loose down jacket, It was hard to hide her slender and outstanding figure. For some reason, my mind was filled with thoughts of her long legs and flat stomach without an inch of excess fat beneath the down jacket. Big brother. Dana placed the backpack down and stood in front of me, shy and tentative, under the dim streetle twilight. I saw her gently biting her lower lip, hesitating to speak. Why are you here? To watch my comedy show? I lowered my head, feeling a bit mun. Dana silently walked behind me and gently patted my back. Does it still hurt? Big brother. Her voice was a bit shaky, and there was a hint of a sob in it, sounding like she was very concerned. In that moment, the little resentment I had towards her completely disappeared. I stood up and, without saying a word, I hugged Dana into my arms. Big brother. I'm sorry. I was really scared at the time. Dana pressed her face against my chest and tightly held onto my waist, apologizing in a trembling voice. It's not your fault. It's all my fault. I was too impulsive. I comforted Dana. As a man, I felt that I should have such a sense of responsibility. In the silent night, we, hugging tightly together, not saying a word. Big brother, as an apology, let me give you a gift. Dana lifted her head. Her breath was like Oriole's song. What gift? I was curious. Close your eye. Dana twisted her waist slightly and freed herself from my embrace. All right. I smiled and closed my eye. The next second, the sound of a zipper opening was heard, and then I felt his soft hands grasp my wrist. She slowly lifted my hand, her movements delicate and gentle, as her actions intensified. A boom off in my head like a stick of dynamite exploding fiercely. I opened my eyes and saw Dana at that moment. Her face as beautiful as a peach blossom, her head lowered in bashfulness. My hands seemed to act independently. The sensation was ineffable and indescribable. Dana twisted her body slightly. The flame of suppression that had been smoldering within me was instantly ignited. A kiss sparked passion, as if thunder roared and fire was kindled from the heaven. Dana's perfect waist and hip lines entranced me, making it hard for me to pull away. I'm so hot. Brother. At this moment, my reason was completely overwhelmed. I stretched out my hand. Dana suddenly grabbed my wrist. Naturally, she lifted her head. Her gaze ditzy but her tone firm. I looked around instinctively and noticed that with the arrival of dawn, I could faintly hear the sounds of people nearby. I'm sorry. Dana. I was too impulsive. My blood cooled rapidly, feeling a sense of regret. Brother, don't apologize. You know I'm willing. Dana leaned into my embrace again. Next time, let's find a different place. Her voice trailed off. I was moved inside and nodded vigorously, as if even the pain on my back had lessened. Your wish could be fulfilled. Getting beaten up didn't seem so bad. Brother, I've packed all your things. You should head back to the provincial capital now. Dana suddenly left my embrace. Back to the provincial capital? The holiday isn't over yet. I was somewhat astonished. I'd just been thinking of using the remaining days of the holiday to find a hotel and finish what we hadn't managed to do today with Dana. Uncle David is really angry this time. You shouldn't appear in front of him for now. I'll help take care of him for you. Uncle David Dana mentioned was my father, her stepfather. Is it really that serious? I was still a bit unbelieving. I'd been beaten many times before, and even if my dad was angry, it would usually blow over in a few days. Much worse than you can imagine. Dana looked at me, her eyes a bit evasive. I went to explain shortly after you left, but got scolded instead for not distinguishing right from wrong. Uncle David didn't believe a word I said. He said he wants to sever the relationship with you and will break your lines if you dare to come home again. I fell silent. I didn't expect the consequences of this time to be so severe. Dana, I have a question for you. How did my dad find out you transferred 10,000 yuan to me? I asked in a low voice. I just asked. It was my mom. She was playing mahjong with my phone and randomly came across the transfer record. Then she told Uncle David about it. Dana looked apologetic. As a result, Uncle David never asked me about it, but he guessed that you had borrowed money from me to spend wildly. Her answer eliminated the last bit of doubt I had left in my mind. As for the incident at the Bathurst, I think it was just a coincidence. Maybe I just didn't notice a familiar person of my dad's that day. Who can I blame? Besides blaming myself for being unlucky enough, I really can't think of anyone else to blame. Thank you, Dana. I'll listen to you and go back to the provincial capital shortly. When I made this decision, I felt like Dana seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, which made me a bit curious. But I quickly convinced myself that this was probably Dana, worrying that I wouldn't listen to her advice and would insist on staying to confront my dad. I'll leave my dad in your care. If anything happens, remember to call me. Looking at Dana's delicate and beautiful face, I suddenly felt a bit reluctant to leave. Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, "You never used to watch these kinds of emotional videos." If you have time, I will. Big brother. Dana twisted her waist a little bashfully. Her face all red. I knew she understood what I meant. I'm leaving. I forcibly suppressed the reluctance in my heart, picked up the backpack by my feet, and was about to turn around to leave. But Dana suddenly rushed forward and hugged me tightly again at this moment. Big brother, I'm sorry. I really don't want this to happen. Without any warning, she suddenly started to cry softly in my arm, her emotions collapsing. I took her reaction as an apology for not covering for me immediately today. I spent a few minutes to calm her down and then picked up my bag to find a taxi. Even after walking a long distance, I could still see Dana's lonely figure standing in the dawn's early light. I felt a mix of reluctance and sweetness, but I had no idea that the real nightmare for me was just beginning. After returning to the provincial capital, the holiday soon ended. My career was at a low point, and I was busy all day long, running around, and my contact with my family less and less frequent, and my relationship with my dad seemed to have really hit rock bottom. In the blink, 3 months had passed. At first, when I called my dad, he would occasionally answer, although each time, he would scold me harshly, but at least he still paid attention to me. But as time went on, whenever I called, my dad refused to answer no matter what. I also asked Dana, who told me that my dad was still angry and that recently, debt collectors had been calling him, making him even more furious. I tried calling relatives back home to ask about my dad's situation, but they all said that my dad rarely went out now, and it was my stepmother, Antella, who was managing everything at home and outside. There was nothing I could do but hope that as my career improved and time passed, my dad would eventually calm down. Another month went by when Dana suddenly called to say that she wanted to take my dad abroad for a trip to relax. I was very supportive of this idea. Maybe after broadening his horizon, he might stop being angry with me. However, what I didn't know was that I would never get the chance to see my dad forgive me. As I watched Dana take my dad abroad for nearly a month without any news, I began to feel uneasy. While I was contemplating whether to go back to my hometown, Dana suddenly appeared in the provincial capital. The joy of reunion instantly dispelled my worry. Dana arrived in the afternoon and told me that everything was fine at home. She came specifically to see me. At that moment, I felt that nothing else in the world mattered more than Dana. I forgot about everything else, took Dana shopping, and enjoying the night view of the provincial capital. She relied on me cutely, like a newlywed, diligent little wife. By night, I took Dana back to my one-bedroom apartment. Dana sat by the bed, slightly lowering her head, looking a bit awkward. I stood aside, quietly admiring her beauty. Because summer had already arrived, the fashion-conscious Dana was dressed very lightly. She wore a sleeveless, colored shirt that made her already ample chest appear even more prominent, often quivering slightly with her movements. And due to her long leg, Dana particularly enjoyed wearing short skirts. Perhaps to see me, she wore a pleated ultra short skirt today that she rarely wore, revealing the pairs of tight, delicate, fair legs that were particularly eye-catching. Dana. Thinking about what might happen next, my throat felt dry. Thought brother, I miss you. Dana lifted her head, her gaze a bit floaty. I miss you, Dana. At this point, whether or not to take a shower seemed unimportant. Dana didn't struggle, didn't refuse, but instead, was very passionate in her compliance. Dana was completely open. I was utterly captivated. After 8 years, I finally got my sister. I lay on the bed, gently holding Dana, silently daydreaming about our life together in the future. For the rather, I'm sorry. Dana suddenly hugged me tightly. It's been so long ago. Why bring it up? I touched her delicate, upturned nose, my tone becoming inadvertently indulgent. I thought she was apologizing for not covering for me on the second day of the Lunar New Year. But I soon found out what her apology really meant to me. Dana looked at me with a complex expression, then got off the bed, opened her bag, and handed me a stack of documents. What is this? I suddenly had a bad feeling. Dana didn't speak. She just took a bath towel hanging nearby and draped it over herself, then stood at the door, looking at me with a guilty expression. I nearly blacked out on the spot. A death certificate was on top of the documents. The cause of death was pancreatic cancer, issued by a small county hospital in a neighboring province. Dana, it's not April Fool's Day. There's no need for such a big joke, right? I tried to smile, but I could hear my voice trembling. Dana didn't say anything, just shook her head gently. My hands began to tremble, flipping through the next document with a faint hope. It was a photocopy of a property certificate for a building in the county, originally under my father's name, was now transferred to the name of my stepmother. And I continued to flip through the document. 2 shops facing the street have already been transferred, and now they also belong to my stepmother. What have you? My eyes were probably a bit bloodshot, so I cowled and seed Anna's expression very clearly. Uncle David was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer last year. Dana finally spoke up. So I deliberately transferred money to you, and then made sure that Uncle David discovered the transaction records through my mom was for your visit to the sauna. It was my mom who had someone investigate. I felt like a knife had been stabbed into my heart. Then on the second day of the Chinese New Year, you deliberately seduced me, so that my mom and dad would find out? Dana nodded, not denying it. Then you pretended to be a good person to trick me away. I had no chance to clear up the misunderstanding with my dad. Dana continued to nod. Then, you and your mom kept slandering me in front of my dad, making him more and more disappointed in me. My thoughts finally began to clarify. Dana remained silent. In the end, under the guise of going on a trip abroad, you completely took my dad away from everyone's sight, making it easier for you to seize his property? I almost bit my teeth to get these words out. My mom had someone pretend to be a judge, saying that you were in jail for not repaying a debt. And then my mom promised to help borrow the money. Uncle David then transferred all the properties to my mom. Donna's tone was strained, neither smug nor remorseful. It seemed to have an indescribable and inexplicable meaning. Well, very well. I won't let you get away with it. I'm going to sue you, and neither of you will escape. I angrily stood up and started to get dressed. Just then, there was a sudden knock on my door. I saw Dana's expression change, as if she let out a soft sigh, and then she reached out to open the door. Before I could figure out what was happening, 5 or 6 burly men rushed into the room and pushed me down onto the bed. What do you want? I struggled with all my might but couldn't break free. It's me. I heard a familiar voice. With great effort, I turned my head and saw my stepmother Ella standing in front of me. Her longer carried the past warmth and gentleness, but was replaced by a coldness as if she were an iceberg. Could this be her true nature? Why are you doing this? I tried to suppress the anger welling up inside me. I hope you can sign this, my stepmother said, holding up a piece of paper in front of me. Vania's a waiver of inheritance right. This is an attempt to make me directly give up my inheritance right. No way, I won't sign it, and I'm going to report you for full. I was consumed by anger and began to struggle fiercely. Make him behave. My stepmother spoke impatiently. Several slaps landed on my face, causing stars to dance before my eyes and everything to go dark. However, the pain on my face was nothing compared to the regret in my heart at this moment. You want to sue me? I think you should worry about how to avoid going to prison instead. My stepmother's tone was mocking. Call the police, right away, and say that your brother raped you. My stepmother turned to Dana. I didn't rape her. Dana consented. My heart sank, realizing that I seemed to have fallen into an even bigger trap. Whether she consented or not is up to me to say. Isn't it, Dana? My stepmother raised her eyebrows with a triumphant look. I'll do whatever Mom says. Dana lowered her head, her voice barely audible. It's over. I wished I could strangle myself out of existence right then and there. Think about it. Did you use a condom? The evidence inside Dana's body is the most direct. As she spoke, my stepmother bent down to pick up Dana's sleeveless shirt that she had been wearing earlier. She pulled the buttons hard, causing them to pop off and scatter all over the floor. Then, not yet satisfied, she picked up the skirt and roughly tore it. Doesn't this make it look more like it? The stepmother threw away the skirt, wiping her hands in a disgusted manner. I stared dummy, struck at the shirt and skirt on the ground, feeling a sense of dignity, being humiliated and trampled upon in my heart. This feeling seemed to come out of nowhere. If you think that's not enough, I can let Dana scratch some more marks on you with her nail. Just let your hand slap Dana a few times. That way, with us as witnesses, it should be considered solid evidence. The stepmother's muttering finally brought me to despair. Whether I admitted it or not, I was completely powerless against the stepmother. Even if I chose to fight to the death, the most likely outcome would still be the fish dying, but the net remaining unbroken. To be honest, my Dana actually likes you quite a bit. If it weren't for your father's illness, I might have even been willing to let you to be together. The stepmother's face broke into a smile. But that smile, in my eyes, only made me feel utter sarcasm. I'll sign. I finally made a decision. Understanding my current situation, my thoughts also shifted. Only when I am alive can I seek revenge. A gentleman seeks revenge. Not until 10 years have passed. That's the spirit. You're not at a total loss either, considering that my Dana, such a beautiful girl, let you sleep with her. The stepmother waved her hand, and a few burly men released me. I felt a burning sensation on my face, unable to tell if it was from being hit or humiliated. Picking up the pen, I mechanically signed my name on the statement of waiving inheritance rights and pressed my fingerprint. By the way, copy this one and sign it too. The stepmother, as if by magic, produced another printed piece of paper. I took the paper and read its content. It was a confession letter, eventually stating that I admitted to raping Dana and was willing to give up my inheritance rights as compensation. The stepmother was indeed meticulous. To prevent me from denying the statement as soon as I turned around, she added an extra layer of insurance. I knew that saying anything at this point was useless, so I quickly copied and signed with my fingerprint. After achieving her goal, the stepmother looked down at me condescending. Are you especially eager to seek revenge? She asked with a mocking smile. Let me give you some advice. Revenge is not something suited for someone like you, a useless person. Don't worry about your father. I've already had him buried in the public cemetery in the county. Make sure to visit him when you have the time. The stepmother left with her people. Dana changed her clothes and walked behind, stopping at the door, where she gave me a complex look. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything before leaving. After that day, I fell seriously ill and almost died. But fortunately, I managed to pull through in the end. In the twinkling of an eye, 3 years had passed. As time went by, the hatred in my heart not only did not diminish, but grew deeper with each passing day. In addition to hatred, driven by a reckless determination, I also achieved success in my career, capitalizing on the trend of live streaming e-commerce. I'd accumulated a fortune of tens of millions of yuan 3 years later. It was time for revenge. I spent a tremendous amount of resources and energy to devise my plan for revenge. But the information you want is all here. The handsome Duke walked into my office. He was a professional con artist who was caught by me while trying to scam me a year ago. Since then, he's been working for me after I got hold of his weakness. It took me a whole year of observation before I finally entrusted the operation of my revenge plan to him. I opened the folder and carefully reviewed all the information inside. This contained all the events of Dana and her mother over the past 3 years. Duke had put a lot of effort into obtaining this information. 3 years ago, Dana's stepmother mortgaged the house and shop in the hometown to the bank for a loan of more than 2 million yuan. Then, the mother and daughter came to the provincial capital and bought a 100-square-meter house with a mortgage, spending 500,000 yuan. Dana used 200,000 yuan to open a small supermarket, using the monthly profits to pay the mortgage. As for the stepmother, she started to slack off after coming to the provincial capital, spending money on beauty treatment, playing mahjong, shopping, and occasionally visiting male model clubs. 3 years have passed, and Dana's supermarket has indeed expanded, Duke estimating its value to be around $1 million. However, her stepmother, due to living off her accumulated wealth, now entirely depends on Dana for support. These are all the documents? I'd put down the folder. Pretty much. But I do think there's something strange about the relationship between the mother and daughter. Duke spoke hesitantly. What do you mean? I asked. Intrigue. It's just a feeling. They don't seem like a normal mother and daughter. Their relationship is more like one of control and being controlled. Duke chose his words carefully. It's like a parasitic relationship, with the mother acting more like a vampire feeding off her daughter. He elaborated. Really? Wouldn't a daughter rebel? I was somewhat doubtful. But, after being brainwashed for a long time, some thoughts and habits become deeply ingrained and hard to change, Duke explained, which I understood. So Dana has been brainwashed all along, trained to be a tool by her mother? After thorough preparation, my plan was carried out smoothly. The handsome Duke easily seduced my stepmother. Then, under Duke's guidance, my stepmother began frequenting a secretive underground casino. What she didn't realize was that the casino only operated when she was there. Moreover, everyone else there, except for her, was an actor. Not to mention, I had registered this casino with the authorities, under the pretext that it was part of my media company's film production. As for the outcome of her bets each time she came, it was entirely under my control. In just 3 months, my stepmother was completely hooked. I manipulated the rhythm of wins and losses, making her obsessed with getting back her losses. She had become a gambler, and cunning she once had were now completely gone. How much does she owe now? I watched my stepmother on the monitor, her hair disheveled and her eyes bloodshot, still placing bet. She owes a total of 3.29 million, including principal and interest. Duke answered respectfully. This number is about right. Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, You never used to watch these kinds of emotional videos. You go and confront her. I'll lit a cigarette. Tell her that she can either pay off the debt with the house, or daughter can sleep with me for 1 more month. Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, You never used to watch these kinds of emotional videos. Duke nodded and left. Soon, I saw on the monitor Duke talking to my stepmother, who suddenly became emotional. Without hesitation, Duke slapped her hard, knocking her over onto the betting table. Then, a group of strong men surrounded her, just as she had done when she threatened me before. But she said she is willing to let her daughter sleep with you, Duke finished, standing by with his hands behind his back. Well, lend her another $1 million. And let me know when you've taken care of the other matters. I stubbed out the cigarette butt and left the casino. At 8 p.m., I arrived at my stepmother in Dana's house with the key. My stepmother had taken the $1 million and gone to the casino again, while Dana was supposedly locked in bed waiting for me to come over. My stepmother didn't know that the big boss behind the casino was me. I silently approached Dana's room door, which was ajar. Dana was lying on the bed in a relaxed big position, completely naked. Her tight and delicate skin glistened under the light. Her hands and feet were tied, and she even had a blindfold on. Her prominent breasts were heaving, indicating that she was very excited. Although she could have screamed for help, she kept her mouth tightly shut. I couldn't figure out how my stepmother managed to do this without any outside help. I intentionally made a slight noise, and I saw Dana instinctively try to close her separated leg. But it was futile. At this moment, I had no intention of cherishing the beauty. There was no buffering, just direct and intense. Dana let out a surprised cry, and then closed her mouth. Not only did she not resist, but she started to cooperate. The sister I once regarded as a goddess had now become so to be. I felt a kind of indescribable anger. You can imagine what a storm it would be under such emotions. Finally, the storm stopped, and I got out nonchalantly, putting on my clothes. Dana suddenly looked at me. Brother, I'm sorry. A soft, voice sounded, and my body stiffened. Brother, I know it's you. You are the only man in my life, and I can't be mistaken. Dana looked very disheveled. Promise me, if there is a next life, can we be husband and wife? Dana's voice was slightly weak. My violence earlier must have caused her considerable harm. I stood in place in silence for a long time before finally going over to untie the restraints on her hands and feet and remove her blindfold. Dana looked at me with a vacant stare, her eyes full of meh. Apart from regret and tenderness, I saw no trace of hatred. I'm sorry. Suddenly, I leaned down, gently embraced her, and then left without looking back. Perhaps my plan for vengeance should come to an end. 1 month later, at the public cemetery in my hometown, I knelt in front of my father's grave, respectfully bowing my head. Dana, who looked even more radiant and beautiful than before, also knelt behind me, bowing her head 9 times with a dark bruise on her forehead. I've gotten back the house you worked so hard for, and Ella Ai has received her dessert. I chattered on in front of my father's grave for a long time, with Dana quietly accompanying me the whole time. After half a day, then I left the cemetery and got into my car. Dana, do you blame me for sending your mom to the psychiatric hospital? I asked her suddenly before driving off. I don't blame you. My mom was already sick. Dana shook her head lightly. I've repaid the debt of her raising me. From now on, I will live for myself. She turned her head to look at me. Fun for you too. This time, after we go back, let's expand the scale of your supermarket again. How about I become the boss, and you become the boss's wife? I said with a smile. Then started the car. I want you to always be my brother. Dana smiled, like a flower blooming in an instant, her beauty beyond description.